Ask most people in Texas what animal they are afraid of, and you will hear the same handful of names come back almost every time. A mountain lion moving through brush country, an alligator sliding off a muddy bank in an East Texas slough, a rattlesnake coiled under a mesquite, a scorpion shaken out of a boot at deer camp. None of that fear comes from nowhere. Every animal on that inherited list is genuinely capable of killing a person, and Texas has the history to prove it. But fear and actual body count in this state do not line up nearly as closely as most people assume. The animal that has quietly taken more Texan lives than almost anything people actually lie awake worrying about is not a predator anyone pictures when they picture danger at all. Here are 11 animals that have taken human lives in Texas, counting down, and the one sitting at the top will not be the one you expect. If you have not run into this channel before, this is the one that goes looking for the gap between what people fear in a place and what actually kills them there, county by county, state by state. Stick around for that, and hit subscribe if that sounds like your kind of rabbit hole. Number 11 is the mountain lion. The animal Texans are perhaps most primed to fear and least likely to ever actually encounter. Mountain lions persist across the state mostly in the remote brush country of South Texas and the rugged terrain of the Trans-Pecos, keeping a level of distance from people that has held for generations. They avoid roads, ranch houses, and anything resembling regular human activity whenever they have the option to. Confirmed fatal attacks in Texas are exceptionally rare. Rare enough that wildlife officers who have spent entire careers in lion country will tell you they have never personally worked a case, and some have never even confirmed a direct sighting despite years of tracking sign across the same stretch of terrain. Locals who actually share ground with these cats tend to describe the same thing. The lion is out there, it has always been out there, and it wants nothing to do with anyone. The fear this animal generates is completely out of proportion to the actual risk, and that gap between reputation and reality is exactly the pattern this whole list is going to keep tracing. Number 10 is the American alligator, confined mostly to the marshes, bayous, and slow rivers of East Texas and the upper Gulf Coast, a stretch of habitat that has grown its resident gator population steadily since protections took hold decades back. Alligators are genuinely dangerous animals capable of killing a person, and Texas has recorded confirmed fatal incidents over the years, almost always tied to someone swimming, wading, or working close to water in a spot with a known resident gator that had likely been tolerated, even fed, by locals for years before anything went wrong. But the actual toll stays low relative to how visible and feared this animal is. An ancient-looking predator that draws headlines every time an incident occurs, precisely because those incidents are rare enough to be newsworthy rather than routine. The kind of story that spreads across the whole state, while quieter deaths elsewhere on this list barely make the local paper. Number 9 is the scorpion, an animal most Texans have crossed paths with more often than any predator on this list, usually while pulling on a boot left outside overnight or moving firewood that had gone undisturbed long enough to become shelter. Ask around, and almost everyone in the Hill Country or North Texas has their own scorpion story. A burning foot in the middle of the night, a sting that ached for a day and then simply stopped being a problem. Texas scorpion stings are common and can be genuinely painful, occasionally serious for small children or people with underlying health conditions, but fatal outcomes from the state's scorpion species are extremely rare, a sharp contrast with species found farther south in Mexico that carry a genuinely more dangerous reputation. This is an animal that generates real, frequent contact with people and real discomfort when it happens, without translating that frequency into anything close to a serious body count. Number 8 is the venomous spider, primarily the black widow and the brown recluse, both established across most of the state and both genuinely capable of delivering medically significant bites. Like the scorpion, these are animals people encounter constantly in garages, woodpiles, closets, and outbuildings across every region of Texas. Tucked into the exact undisturbed corners a homeowner rarely checks until something forces the issue. The bites themselves are treated seriously by anyone who has actually had one, and the stories circulate widely. A coworker's swollen arm, a cousin's miserable week that felt like a stomach flu that would not end, each one reinforcing the reputation. Confirmed deaths from either species remain rare in the modern era, largely because medical treatment for the bites is well established and widely accessible across nearly every part of the state, even rural counties. The fear this pair generates, passed down through generations of cautionary stories about checking boots and gloves before putting them back on, outpaces the confirmed toll by a wide margin. Number 7 is the venomous snake, a category covering rattlesnakes, copperheads, cottonmouths, and coral snakes across the state's wildly varied habitat, from West Texas desert to East Texas swamp to the rocky hill country in between. Texas records more venomous snake bites than almost any other state, simply because it has more snake habitat and more people living and working inside it. Ranchers, hunters, hikers, and homeowners alike sharing ground with several different venomous species, depending on which part of the state they call home. Those bites are taken seriously, treated aggressively, and occasionally fatal, particularly when antivenom access is delayed by distance or timing, and every family with deep roots in rural Texas seems to carry at least one story of a relative who was bitten and survived, or one who was not so lucky. Even so, confirmed snakebite deaths remain a small fraction of the total incidents, thanks in large part to how quickly modern emergency medicine responds once a bite is reported, and how widely antivenom is now stocked across the state's hospital network. Snakes hold a permanent, deserved place in the state's collective fear, and they still do not crack the upper half of this list. Number 6 is the mosquito, and this is the one Texans consistently leave off a list like this without ever quite meaning to. Every summer across the state, mosquitoes turn backyard cookouts, boat ramps, and evening walks into brief clouds of static noise that get slapped away and forgotten within seconds. Most bites do nothing worse than itch for a day, but Texas mosquitoes carry West Nile virus in measurable numbers every single season, concentrated most heavily in the warm, humid stretches of the Gulf Coast and the sprawling suburbs of North Texas, where standing water collects in gutters, flower pots, and drainage ditches after every rain. The vast majority of people who get bitten by an infected mosquito never develop symptoms serious enough to notice. A smaller number develop a fever that passes, and a much smaller number, usually older adults or people with compromised immune systems, develop a neurological complication that can be fatal. The insect responsible is smaller than a fingernail, present in essentially every county in the state, and treated with less caution than almost anything else on this list, precisely because the overwhelming majority of encounters end in nothing more than an itchy welt. If any of this matches something you have actually lived through, a scorpion sting that lasted longer than it should have, a mosquito season that hit different in your part of the state, drop your county in the comments. This channel runs on that kind of local detail more than any statistic ever could. Number 5 is the feral hog, a species that has expanded across nearly every region of the state and turned confrontational encounters into a real and growing concern for landowners, hunters, and anyone working rural property after dark, especially in the hill country and East Texas timber belts, where the population has climbed the fastest. Anyone who has actually tried to manage hogs on their own land will tell you the same thing. Trapping programs, aerial removal contracts, and years of aggressive control efforts have absorbed real money without producing the kind of decline landowners were promised, because a sounder of hogs can rebuild its numbers faster than most operations can remove them. Feral hog attacks are documented and occasionally serious, and fatal encounters remain uncommon relative to the sheer size of the population roaming the state. But the trend line here points in a direction most of the animals above it on this list do not share, an upward one, which is worth watching even if the current toll has not yet caught up to the reputation this animal has been earning season after season. Number 4 is the fire ant, an invasive species that arrived in the state decades ago and has never meaningfully left. spreading across yards, pastures, and roadsides in mounds that most Texans have learned to spot and step around without much conscious thought, the same way they would step around a pothole. A single fire ant sting is rarely dangerous on its own, but a swarm attack, the kind that happens when someone unknowingly kneels on or disturbs a mound, can deliver dozens or hundreds of stings in a matter of seconds, and flooding makes it worse, since rising water pushes entire colonies into the open and into direct contact with people who had no idea the mound was ever there. For anyone with a significant allergic sensitivity, that volume of venom can trigger a fatal anaphylactic response before help can arrive. Confirmed fire ant deaths in Texas are more common than most people assume for an animal this small, precisely because the insect is so completely normalized, treated as a yard nuisance rather than a genuine medical risk, right up until the moment it isn't. Number 3 is livestock, cattle and horses specifically, animals almost nobody in Texas thinks to include on a list like this because they live on ranches and pastures instead of in the wild, tended and worked by the very people they occasionally injure or kill, fed by hand, ridden, and treated as trusted partners rather than any kind of threat. Large animal handling remains one of the more dangerous routine activities in rural Texas life. Kicks, trampling, and crush injuries during everyday ranch work, loading a trailer, working a chute, moving a herd through a narrow gate, account for a steady toll that rarely makes statewide news because it happens quietly, one incident at a time, on private land far from any headline or camera. The animals themselves are not considered dangerous in any cultural sense, which is exactly why this category sits as high as it does on this list, an entire category of confirmed fatalities that almost nobody files under animal danger at all, filed instead under farm accident or ranch mishap, language that quietly removes the animal from the conversation entirely. Number 2 is the domestic dog, and this is where the list starts to genuinely unsettle people, because the animal responsible for more confirmed fatal attacks in Texas than any wild predator on this list is also the animal most Texans keep in their own home, sleeping at the foot of the bed or waiting by the door every evening. The vast majority of pet dogs pose no meaningful risk to anyone, and it would be both inaccurate and unfair to suggest otherwise, and nothing about this entry is meant to indict every dog in the state. But fatal dog attacks do occur in Texas every year, disproportionately involving unsupervised interactions with young children or encounters with unfamiliar dogs outside a controlled setting, and the sheer number of dogs living in close daily contact with people far outweighs every wild species on this list combined, meaning even a low individual risk adds up to a real and confirmed toll. This is an animal almost nobody frames as dangerous precisely because framing it that way runs against how deeply dogs are woven into Texas family life, and that emotional resistance is part of what keeps this entry from getting the attention its numbers actually deserve. Which brings this list to number 1, and it is not a predator, not a reptile, not anything with claws, fangs, or the kind of silhouette that shows up in a nightmare. It is the bee, the wasp, and the hornet, a category of small flying insects that most Texans swat at reflexively and forget about within minutes, barely registering the encounter as anything worth a second thought. And it is, according to the pattern that holds true across this state and the country as a whole, the single leading cause of confirmed animal-related human deaths. The mechanism is almost entirely allergic rather than toxic. A sting from a bee, wasp, or hornet delivers a dose of venom that the vast majority of people shrug off after a few uncomfortable minutes. A welt, some swelling, maybe a mild headache that fades by the next morning. For a smaller but far from negligible portion of the population, that same sting triggers a severe, sometimes rapid allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, that can close the airway and stop the heart within minutes if it is not treated immediately with epinephrine, a reaction that can escalate faster than most bystanders are prepared to recognize, let alone respond to. Because these insects are everywhere, in gardens, parks, attics, wall cavities, and roadside brush across every region of the state, And because most people have no idea whether they carry a serious sting allergy until the exact moment they are stung and find out the hard way, often with no prior warning and no known history to flag the risk beforehand, the sheer frequency of exposure across the entire population quietly outpaces every other animal on this list. Snake, gator, hog, dog, mosquito, all of it combined. That is the twist worth sitting with at the top of this list. Every animal ranked above this one gets treated culturally as some level of genuine threat, something you watch for, something you respect, something you tell your kids to be careful around before letting them run loose in the yard or the pasture. The bee gets swatted. The wasp nest under the porch eave gets ignored for another week because nobody wants to deal with it yet, promising themselves they will get to it this weekend and then the next one instead. The hornet drifting past a picnic table gets waved off without a second thought, treated as an annoyance rather than anything worth genuine caution. And that complete absence of fear, that total normalization of an insect most people encounter dozens of times every single Texas summer without incident, is exactly what allows it to quietly outkill every animal Texans actually spend their energy being afraid of. Every animal on this list is real, documented, and capable of taking a human life, and none of them deserve to be dismissed just because the numbers land the way they do. But if this list proves anything, it is that the animals people fear most in Texas, and the animals actually responsible for the most confirmed deaths, are more often than not two completely different lists, and the gap between them is wide enough to fit an entire porch full of wasp nests nobody has gotten around to knocking down yet. If you want more of these overlooked Texas patterns brought into the light, the animals nobody puts on the list until the numbers force the issue, subscribe and stay close. Because the next animal on a list like this might already be living somewhere on your own property without anyone giving it a second thought.